Brought to you by Charity Mobile. Switch to the phone company that supports your beliefs. All plans start under $50 before taxes and surcharges. Use promo code TRADITION at CharityMobile.com for a special offer.
Sometimes you have to ask yourself, what are these bishops thinking? Now, obviously, it's not every bishop. Most bishops in the church just do their job, generally focus on their diocese, and try not to cause scandal, especially on a daily basis. But others know what they're going to do causes scandal, and they decide they're just going to jump in with both feet into the scandal. Maybe they're naive and think, well, the modern world, we're in modern times now. The church's teachings on moral things are changing all the time, and we're working in the name of synodality and dialogue to correct the errors in biblical translations, to make certain things that the church had always taught as sins, not sins because the church was wrong. That's what they do. They say these things sometimes. I cover it here daily. If you're new to this channel, and you like these news stories, or you find this provocative and you can't believe what I'm saying, but you're intrigued, hit the subscribe button, hit like, it does help. We go to Novus Ordo Watch. No, I'm not a sedevacantist, but they do good reporting there. They give us this headline. New Austrian bishop's personal secretary is a married James Martin type who held major post at local Jewish community only weeks earlier. There's a lot to unpack in that headline, to be sure. Not too worried about that community center stuff he did. Probably not appropriate for a bishop to hire somebody to be his secretary who isn't a priest, or at least a layperson, a Catholic layperson, but it is what it is. That's bad enough, but since the Nostra Aetate was issued, you can understand why some bishops don't blink at those kinds of hiring decisions, even though the law in most places says the church is free to hire people of its own religion to work in its various jobs it needs to run said religion. That's how the law works in most Western democracies today. Now, but instead, let's talk about the James Martin subject. The sin that James Martin has an unhealthy interest in for a priest is inherently taught in scripture, sacred tradition, and magisterial authority as a sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance. It is a particularly grave sin. It is like a moral sin plus, basically. Mortal sins are nothing to sneeze at by themselves. This is something else entirely. This is another level. There are certain sins like that, and that sin that James Martin says the Bible got wrong as a sin. That the translations have all been wrong. That really the sins that were the cause of a couple of cities in the Old Testament being destroyed by God in his wrath were because they were inhospitable or they were going to force themselves upon their guests. No, instead, the Bible is silent on that sin. If you really squint and you look modern translations and you take modern scholarship into account, it's heresy what he does. But these bishops believe it. From the article, quote, on January 31st, Pope Francis appointed 52-year-old Reverend Johannes Freitag as auxiliary bishop of the Diocese of Graz-Seckau in Austria. He was officially ordained on May 1st during the Novus Ordo Sedevacant period. In his function as auxiliary in Graz-Seckau, Freitag has been working with Bishop Wilhelm Kraschwackel, the local ordinary. On September 29th, 2025, the Mexican Novus Ordo news website, Agencia Católica de Noticias, published an interesting report, one whose veracity we have been able to verify independently. Freitag, the new auxiliary of Graz, that would be the assistant bishop, has chosen for his personal secretary a man who is officially married to his like partner. But not only that, it turns out that at least as of March 24th, 2025, a mere 5.5 weeks before the May 1st ordination ceremony of Bishop Freitag, the now Episcopal secretary was still listed as holding the position of Secretary General of Graz's local Jewish community. You can't make this stuff up. And then it goes into the names of the people, which I will abide by the rules of these places and not go into too much about the personal information about them. Auxiliary Bishop Freitag also has a Facebook account. Among the photos posted there, we find that the people in pictures shows up in a few pictures, including one published as far back as May 1st, when he served for the Episcopal ordination of Most Reverend Freitag. And there's the picture. In other words, James Martin type in a parody of Holy Matrimony serves also at this guy's masses, which means he's a Catholic, I guess. A lot of questions here. Is he one of those Catholics who also keeps to our elder brother's religious traditions? That's formally condemned by the church. Not exactly clear. I'll let you decide. However, this is cause for scandal by itself because of the bishop essentially endorsing the way the person is living. We would not expect someone who was married in a Catholic marriage who was then violating their marriage vows by publicly, looking at evil movies on the internet, or in an actual adulterous relationship that was extramarital. I know that's a redundancy, but bear with me. We wouldn't expect such a person who was doing these things and had been known to be doing these things to be given a job as important as the personal secretary to a bishop by the diocese. But that is where we are. Now, you might be asking, well, why? Well, because the Austrian bishops, it turns out, are nearly as bad as the German bishops. That is why this stuff happens. And the article goes on and makes that more clear. So let's go back to that just for a moment. From the article, quote, where the whole story gets stranger still. An Austrian traditionalist reports on a website he maintains, quote, that the person also shows himself to be extremely flexible when it comes to religious issues. Until 2025, he was Secretary General of the Jewish community in Graz and shared his sudden knowledge of Austrian Judaism and kosher wine with MKV, which is a secondary school students association circles. But then he moved to become Master of Ceremonies and Secretary to the new auxiliary Bishop Johannes Freitag. It is astonishing that a non-theologian and James Martin type, legally married to someone like himself, should take on this role in the Diocese of Graz-Seckau. Strange choice with dubious qualifications on the part of the chosen one, but one that illustrates how little the Catholic Church gives a flip anymore about its own teachings. End quote. And that is right there why we're talking about this. We get a lot of lip service today. Not even lip service. We get over-the-top hardcore teachings from the Pope and on down to our bishops about how the church has always taught this about, say, immigration, the issue they seem most obsessed with today. But the moral teachings go out the window. They're up for debate. You might be aware, if you follow my channel, that the U.S. bishops just approved for private study a new translation of the Bible for the United States that erases the James Martin sin entirely. It gets rid of that sin entirely and replaces it with illicit activities of the flesh. It denies it actually changes the words of the translations to fit James Martin's understanding of sacred scripture, to spit in the face of magisterial authority, and, of course, the law of God. It's because, as the person they quote there in that article said, the church no longer gives a flip about its own teachings. It's obvious. Keep in mind also that it's widely believed, with a lot of circumstantial evidence, that a whole lot of these bishops, more than a plurality of them, are of, we'll say, like mind of James Martin. We don't know if they engage in, shall we say, synodal encounters or not. I will presume every bishop keeps to his vows and to his promises until he has shown that he does not. But you have to wonder a little bit when they do these things that are clear violations of the church's teachings. That's leaving the whole Nostra Aetate issue aside. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.